There we go. Connor, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's a pleasure being here.
I appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with us. It's been really fun getting to know you now that you've moved back. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but I'll let you share that story. But we met not too long ago at the What's the Big Idea pitch competition. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That was a great event over there.
Yeah, it was. And how long had you been back in town when you were at that event? It was pretty recent, right?
Yeah, I just been back in town about 2 weeks before.
Wow.
I helped Chris Ayala actually with his project over there, and he invited me out, and it was an awesome experience.
It's a great event. You know, we've got Startup Day coming up. I think it's in November, and they're accepting applications right now. So I can't wait
Yeah,
to do that. I'm sure I'll see you there.
yeah, absolutely. I'd love it.
Well, cool. Well, if for the audience's sake, if you just share a little bit about your background, maybe education or work into early career, and then share your experience on the West Coast with us, it'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Miami, actually. I was an athlete, and football brought me up to East Tennessee. I played at Maryville College.
Right.
From Maryville College, being in East Tennessee, especially 5 years ago, it wasn't a huge startup area. So I was kind of venturing off. I knew I wanted to be in the finance world. So I went to business school, and I went to the Holt International Business School. And what really attracted me to that was the opportunity to travel. So I actually started out in San Francisco. And I knew that like Google and Facebook were there, but that was as far as I knew about San Francisco and Silicon Valley and the madness that's going on there.
Right.
So I eventually networked my way into a venture capital fund out there. It was called G51. They were actually based out of Austin, Texas.
Okay.
Um, but I was working remotely from them, and I was just kind of sourcing deals, and especially coming from the land of East Tennessee. I was learning about IoT and SaaS and all these acronyms that I had no idea what they were, but it was just an awesome experience out there. And then from there, I did 1 semester in Shanghai, China,
Okay.
and that was even more madness. And I won't even get into that. That's a conversation for another time. And then we did a semester in Dubai, and then finally I finished up my Master's of Finance degree in Boston. And then when I was in Boston, I was able to work for a PE fund out there,
Okay.
which was really unique. And then we were looking for jobs all over the place. We were like, oh, are we going to go back to San Francisco? Are we going to go to Austin? Are we going to stay here in Boston? And my girlfriend got a letter from a startup here in town, and we decided to come back home to East Tennessee.
And here you are. A lot of questions springing out of that, Connor. So I'd like to start with just sort of even going back maybe even further. What was it that appealed to you about entrepreneurship and startups in the first place? Having obviously athletes are driven, and we can probably have that conversation too. But going to Maryville College, there is this misconception that this area doesn't have much of a startup movement, and it probably didn't when you were here. It's definitely changed since then. But were you exposed to entrepreneurship maybe through a family member? Sometimes we hear, or just what was it that sort of caught your attention about wanting to be involved in that?
Yeah, so I guess I didn't even realize it until I really understood what entrepreneurship was. But
Uh,
my family, they've had a Century 21 franchise in Miami since the 50s. We literally helped develop Miami. So that looking back on it, you could say that that's very entrepreneurial, and my family's always kind of worked for themselves. And
right.
I decided to take a different route and kind of do modern day entrepreneurship, if you
Gotcha.
will. So that's kind of what I've been chasing.
Not the standard sort of what we might call brick and mortar type traditional business models. So as you alluded to, real estate and financial advisors and all these are entrepreneurs too. But I think it sounds like you were more interested in the type of entrepreneurship where it's you're heading off and you're sort of going after something unique that's not a traditional or existing business model. Would that be a true statement?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm hoping to change the world one day, right? As
Yes.
as all entrepreneurs are. So yeah, that's kind of what I was chasing, is that big dream.
So, and was there lots of support from the family when you said, "Hey, by the way, this is what I'm going to go do"? I mean, I'm just curious, what were those responses like?
Yeah, no, they've always been super, you do you type of mentality. So definitely had a lot of support from them, and always been, even mentoring me and helping me any way they can. So I've been blessed, truly.
Great. And what was it appealed to you about? I think you said the finance side was your focus even early on before your MBA. Is that true? What was your undergrad in?
Yeah, so even my undergrad was finance and accounting, and I minored in economics. And it was just I feel like the nuts and bolts of a company are in the numbers. And I really I fell in love with being dissect a company, seeing where they're making money, seeing how they're making money, seeing where they're spending their money, what they're doing with it, and it just something about it. It's probably pretty nerdy, but it appealed to me, and that's kind of what I've been chasing.
Well, I hate to mention stereotypes, but I think a lot of people are maybe thinking right now, how does a collegiate athlete get into numbers, right? So I mean, not the soft skills, but more the hard stuff. So I think it's a really wise choice in my opinion. I think you're right. I think it really those that background provides an extremely strong basis just for business in general, whether you go into the corporate world or working with entrepreneurs and things like that. So walk me through how you go from, finishing up at Maryville and then going out, because, from here you are in East Tennessee and you're all the way out in Silicon Valley working with startups. How did that come to be?
Yeah, so again, we had several options of where we were going to start our program, and we knew that the finance portion, just the East Coast being finance driven. So to do the Master's of Finance portion of our degree, we had to finish in Boston. So to start it, we were like, the whole point of doing this was to go and see as many places as we could.
Right.
Let's go out to the West Coast, and I'd spent some time in LA, but I'd never been in Silicon Valley. Didn't really understand what the hype was. Why is this real estate so expensive? You know, trying to figure that out, that whole thing. Um, but I really just fell into it and happened by chance that we were like, oh, well, if we have to finish in Boston, let's start in San Francisco. And
Okay.
it was totally by chance and by luck that I had that mentality, I guess.
Right. And so the company that you went to work with out there, or the program that you were, was there, I'm just curious again, so part of this is sort of relating East Tennessee startups with, traditional Silicon Valley, Boston, all the right areas you're mentioning you've been around. Was there any sort of question on their end about, well, why is a guy from East Tennessee interested in the startup world or this type of experience?
No, so it was definitely an internship, and they were just happy to have free labor, I think, right?
Really
But
intelligent free labor, right?
yeah, no, absolutely. But what was really appealing about the program is that there was definitely a vetting process. I'm working with MBA students from Harvard, from Duke, from the most prestigious schools that you can think of. There
Yeah,
was a
so
couple
I think that's where
kids
I'm
from
going.
Stanford.
Sorry to cut you off there, but I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at, just not doing a good job of it, asking questions. Is, that might be the perception is that people that would get those internships are from those schools, right? Harvard, Yale, all the Ivy League that people think of when they think investment banker, startup, all that stuff. So was there any sort of shock at all on your end that, hey, a guy from Maryville College got into these programs? Obviously you're clearly talented and smart, so I see why they took you, but do you see where I'm going with that? I'm kind of curious if there was any of that.
Say it was probably definitely a lot of luck again.
Sure.
Nothing particularly that I think that I stood out, except for the fact that I took the initiative and
Right.
reached out to them and said, "Hey, this is part of a program that I'd like to be involved with, and I'm learning. This is going to be a huge learning curve for me, and just kind of stepping out of my comfort zone and kind of being more on the offensive than the defensive side of the equation."
Yeah, so I think you nailed it right there. I think that sounds to be makes perfect sense of why just willing to take that initiative and put your own name out there. A lot of people won't do that because they would make that assumption that I'm making, right? Oh, well, I'm from this Eastern Tennessee area that no one thinks startups go on. Why would they take me out there? So that's really
Right.
cool. So you leave there and then you get to do what you wished. You're traveling and you're in China, you're in Dubai, and you said we could talk about that another time. I'm curious if I asked you to kind of summarize all that experience up. I mean, what are some of the key things you think you learned about the startup industry while you were going through that? Any points kind of spring to mind?
I think that the startup industry is vastly different from place to place. I think Silicon Valley is absolutely cutting edge. Um, China is very closed off, if you will. Like
Okay.
they're very secretive.
So they're keeping the outside away and
And that's just how their whole culture is, which that's just what they do, right? You're not allowed to have Google or Facebook or any of these big
right.
names out there, so that they're very secretive and closed off. Dubai, they just have so much money they don't know what to do with, and they're just kind of throwing money at companies left and right and overvaluing them. And Boston, I would say, is very structured. They take a very traditional East Coast finance approach to startups.
Okay.
So I'd say those were my biggest glaring differences between the different geographies.
Sure, and just driven by the geography and separation and the unique characteristics of each country, then it sounds like kind of how they go about things. If you had to, let's pick those four. Let's say Dubai, China, Boston, Silicon Valley. If you had to pick any of those, was there? I think I know the answer, but I'll try not to give it away. Is there any of those that sort of stick out to you as really, really getting it? I mean, if you had to pick one of those four to go to, say, as your own startup, was there one that you would sort of lean toward?
It's actually the tail end of that made that a very interesting
Okay,
question.
great.
So I think obviously Silicon Valley is the creme de la creme, right? And they're the top world class. But if I was in my own startup, I think the a very important part of startups is keeping your costs low, and
Ah,
it's nearly impossible to do that in a place like Silicon Valley. I
right.
lived in a 350 square foot apartment in Silicon Valley, and I was paying nearly $3,000 a month,
Insane.
and that's standard, right? The average rent in Silicon Valley is almost $4,000 a month. So, and that was a big reason why I came back to Tennessee was to keep my costs low again, especially coming right out of school with a ton of student loan debt. Um, so I would probably say that I'd probably choose Boston because cost of living isn't terrible.
Okay.
It's a very cutting edge city as far as, you have MIT and Harvard and the best schools around that are really embracing entrepreneurs and having some of the world class incubators, if you will. And they're really feeding entrepreneurs very well. So, costs coming into consideration as well as cutting edge technology and facilities, I'm going to go with Boston.
Yeah, so I just for the listener's sake, I want to say we didn't pre-plan that question, but I will say that it fits exactly into why the Southbound exists in the first place, is trying to promote this area. One of the benefits is cost of living. Sounds like Boston has really got it figured out in terms of a combination of best of both worlds, pretty good cost of living, but yet really has the startup industry and infrastructure where it needs to be. We're not quite there yet as a community. So let's use that as a springboard and talk about East Tennessee. You wrote a great article not too long ago on LinkedIn talking about your experience now that you've come back. So maybe you could summarize that for folks. You moved back to East Tennessee. It wasn't the startup area you thought it was, or you would have liked when you left. You come back. We've certainly advanced quite a bit. What was the initial impressions when you got back in town?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of that, you guys have made leaps and bounds since I left, and that I came back looking for it as well.
Right.
Um, so I was saying, all right, what is there? What are the resources around? And even the career development at Marable College, that was the first place I went to. I was like, hey, what is going on in the startup world? Here's what I've been doing. I want to stay in this general realm. And they gave me a bunch of people to reach out to and different events to go to and things like that. So that was a huge help. Glaring that they were even involved in it. So it's here. And just to kind of summarize the article, I think like you said, cost of living is so low and not so low. It's moderate. It's doable, if you will. But cost of living is great, and then you like I talked about in the article, you have ORNL that's just attracting unbelievable scientists and all these different things within the startup world, and you have these great scientists that are trying to now commercialize their findings, and it's definitely growing exponentially. You've had a few funds come up in the area due to that. Guys who people like me wouldn't know, but they've been working at this for 20 years or so,
Right.
and just now starting to see some traction, and it's really it's really on the verge of hitting a hockey stick, if you will.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've been talking about that as a group, but it seems to be just really close to springboarding along. I know some of the other cities in Tennessee and throughout the South are a little bit further ahead, but I feel like Knoxville is sort of that unsung secret. So hopefully we can change that as a group. If you had to sort of impart any lessons from your time traveling in these other startup areas, is there any key lessons that Tennessee needs to pay attention to that you experienced in those areas?
Yeah, I'd say, and I think having conversations with people like yourself and other investors in the area, we're all on the same page with it. But it's getting investors to and entrepreneurs to not fear failure and embrace failure, and looking at failure the right way. I think overall it's an incredibly conservative culture, which is what makes it what it is, and that's why we love it. But not being afraid to fail and saying, okay, even going towards failure, right? I had a professor one time tell me that the hardest part of training somebody new in the army is to train them to run towards the guns, right?
Right.
Whenever you hear gunshots, you run away. And that was the best piece of advice that I ever got, is run towards the guns. And I think that's what East Tennessee and all of the more conservative areas need to kind of embrace, if you will.
So, yeah, being willing to fail, and then you sort of alluded to access to capital coming in and things like that. One of the things the area I think struggles with a little bit, and I've had this conversation this morning through email with someone else, Courtney Piper, who was on the podcast. We're having a little bit of a struggle with enough deal flow. Do you have any thoughts around deal flow and how to improve that based on the experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I think, the places that I were, people were picking up and changing their entire lives to have a company there, right? Like people will come from the middle of Arkansas or wherever to be in Silicon Valley and
Marvel College.
live in a right and live in a tent to start their company because this is it. I had a few professors when I was out there who were angel investors and would invest, and they said to me that if you're not here in Silicon Valley, then you're not truly committed. And I think a lot of people take that very personally, and they absolutely do pick up everything and go out there, and that's the only way to survive. But I think, with digitalization and being able to have conversations like this, and I don't know how necessary it truly is anymore. Um, Access to capital, it's coming for sure.
Awesome, awesome, really good stuff. So, a few more questions, and then we'll start to wrap it up. But I'm curious, also, just from you, I think you self-proclaimed geek, numbers guy. So, I'm also curious about any lessons from just the numbers side of startups and things like that. I think you did a lot of financial analysis on companies, correct? I have that right?
Yeah, and I'd say especially in the earlier stage, it's all guessing, right? And
Right.
saying it, and it comes down to actually really simple math of saying, all right, here's my market size, here's my TAM, what I can actually address, and here's what I'm going to attack, and it all gets pretty simple numbers. I think it's when you actually start getting more developed that it gets a lot more complex. And okay, exactly what products am I putting where? But I think early on in these startup stages, it's fairly
It's
simple.
a bit of a dartboard, right? Kind of taking that
Yeah.
guess. And so from your perspective and doing that type of analysis for companies and things, do they also grasp that it really is a bit of a dartboard that early on? They're still doing their due diligence to be deliberate about it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is if a listener's in a startup right now and they're worried, oh my goodness, how do we figure out a valuation? 'Cause this is actually a question I get quite a bit. It's so early. How do I get any sort of valuation? Should they have that fear, or is the other side of the table really understand that that's where things are in the first place?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the it shouldn't be a fear because I'd say what 90%, especially pure venture capitalists, are going off of is your general idea. Do you have a commercial idea? Is this a great idea to take to market? And who is the team running this, right? Are you a first time entrepreneur? Have you what's your experience even in the industry, or you're a consultant, or how long have you been in the industry, or you just kind of go in by the seat of your pants, or or you look at somebody like Elon Musk, who it doesn't exactly isn't an astronaut, and he's raised a ton of money in SpaceX. So
Right. But
I
would you
think
say
it's
though that that's because they're betting on that entrepreneur though? It's less about,
absolutely,
yeah, and so you experience
absolutely.
some of that in your time.
Yeah, it's hugely valued, especially early on when you don't even have a product on the management team, right? Are they showing up on time? Are they delivering on their promises? Are they actually talking to these customers? Because we're going to go talk to your customers and stuff like that, right? So
It's a great point.
that's yeah. So yeah, yeah. So I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that.
So they're betting on the jockey, not the horse itself, is the proverbial saying. So having that sort of experience, and if you don't have that, if you're a listener and you don't have that sort of experience, hopefully Connor will agree. One of the great things you can do is go out, and that's the reason the team matters in the first place. A lot of the decision is around the team, because if the team can't execute on the idea, it doesn't matter how good the idea is. So would you agree with that statement?
Yes, and I would also say vice versa, where you can have a very mediocre idea and have a rock star team, and you're probably going to outperform most other companies.
Right, right, because the team can execute and get it done and has that experience to do it.
Yep.
Well, awesome stuff. So what's next for you? I know I can't talk about some things, but what's sort of next for you now that you're back in town?
Yeah, no, I'm just hoping to stay engaged in the community, and venture out as much as I can and help as many other companies as I can, and enjoying life right now.
And your girlfriend, your significant others here in town working in a startup, so both going on. So I imagine evening conversations are are fun.
Oh yeah, working on both sides of the table. So if
Both
we could
sides.
only collaborate.
You never know, right? You never know.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, Connor, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your experience. I know it's going to help the listeners a whole lot. If anyone did want to reach out to you personally just to connect or ask any questions, is there a best way for them to go about that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. It's Connar, Connar, Epstein, Epstein. Well, it's actually my full name,
It's
Eric
okay.
Connar
We'll link to it.
Benson-Epstein. Yeah. So yeah.
So
So
just reach out through LinkedIn would be the best way to do it.
yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I'm everywhere. So
Fantastic. Well, we're thrilled you're back in town. We're thrilled you're part of the community, and I look forward to networking with you some more.
great. Thanks, Jonathan. It was a
Thank,
pleasure being here.
thank you.